This episode is brought to you by TaxAct. Don't do your taxes alone. Join TaxAct's National Admin Night. Admin nights are social gatherings for getting through your to-do list. So get ready for a night of fun, finding deductions, and filing taxes with TaxAct, where you can file your federal and state return for just $49 through April 8. Let's get together and get them over with. Visit taxact.com/admin-night for details.
Welcome to The Secret Life of Cookies, where we try to solve the world's problems through the miracle of carbohydrates, one recipe at a time, with host Marissa Rothkopf and her dog, Bosco.
This week, I am busting at the seams, pleased to have as my guest the incredible Simon Majumdar, star of the Food Network, host of my favorite podcast, Eat My Globe, and all-around decent human being. We say surprising things about British food, scones and scones, the perfect martini, and we also fall into a crazy rhapsody over fish and chips. Also, food history and why it's so darn important. And we make Simon's popular almond biscuits. But what kind of biscuit? You must tune in to find out. This episode best enjoyed with a brisk cuppa or a crisp cold martini, your choice. Anyway, I want to thank you so much for coming on The Secret Life of Cookies. I'm welcoming today the one and the only Simon Majumdar, and a man who I would say needs no introduction, but the truth is, once I do start to introduce you, I've got, let's see, what do I have? You are a television personality. Well, I call you a television person because personality makes you seem so shallow. And I don't think of you that way. And you're not a shallow person. And you've written brilliant books that have seen me through COVID and before that. And you're a former publisher. You probably like Puppies and Kittens, things I don't know about you. And also you're a food history boffin, as you call yourself. And those of us of British backgrounds understand what you mean. But how do you, so let's say we meet at a cocktail party and I haven't a clue who you are because I'm clueless. How do you introduce yourself to people?
I usually tell people I'm a food writer, I guess is probably the easiest thing. I think, that's the kind of soul of what I do. Everything comes from that. That's my kind of joy if I'm here at home, as I have been obviously during the last year. The thing that has kept me sane has been writing and writing my new podcast, which the new season, in fact, just launched a few days ago, season 6, which is quite remarkable that we're on season 6. That I do with the Department of History at UCLA. But I've had, quite a lot of journeys to get here. So unless people get kind of very bored, I will kind of give them the whole story when I meet them at a party, which is everything from being a failed Anglican trainee minister to a book publisher to kind of world traveler to what I do now, and I'm very lucky that I don't have to describe too often what I do. I do whatever anyone asks me to that's legal.
Okay, it's good that you have some sort of, limit. It has to be legal.
Some morals, not many.
Some moral. Well, I mean, as a former Anglican trainee, the British system of education is a little different than ours. I have a daughter who's trying to decide where to go to college. I have a British husband, and I've been trying to explain to him the liberal arts education and how you don't have to decide at the age of 16 or 17 what you're going to do for the rest of your life. Were you at the age of 16 or 17 thinking you were going to become an Anglican minister?
Oh, well before that. So, from quite a young age of 10, 11, as a kind of Anglican churchgoer of the quite kind of conservative type, what they might call high up the candle, as they might say in England. So I was kind of almost Roman Catholic, but not quite, as it were. So I went to very, churches that were what they call smells and bells, and so from a very early age, I was convinced this is what I wanted to do. So I studied theology at King's London. So that's my degree. This was in the days before kind of everyone felt they had to get a master's to be accepted in life. So I'm not sure that I would have been smart enough to get a master's, but I never did. So, it became very clear to me very early on that was not going to be my calling in the end. So I ended up with a degree in theology, which was, say, pretty vocational, to say the least, and having to find a life after that. And then I ended up in publishing by accident. I think a lot of my life has been by accident. Stuff happens to me by accident all the time, both good and bad. So I ended up in a bookshop, working in a bookshop, polishing, shelves and doing all the other things that people do in wonderful bookshops, if people remember what a bookshop was.
Yes,
which
I do.
was,
yes, fondly.
yeah, I know it. I miss them, and I miss, like, I enjoyed working in a bookshop enormously, and mine was very special because it was owned by Penguin, but in the Liberties department store, which is one of the most beautiful department stores in London. So this is way back in the 80s. And so apart from having to serve kind of famous people who came into the store every now and again, like Fred Astaire or David Niven, and all the people who I kind of worshipped as Hollywood stars, and one of our regulars was Lemmy from Motorhead, who used to come in and buy the most kind of obscure philosophy books and was very kind and very smart. But then ended up in publishing and did quite well with that for a long time until the kind of early 2000s. And then the publishing company I was helping to run started to fail. My mother died, and I had a really bad nervous breakdown. And I talk about this a lot when I do demos and talks about it. And so I ended up quitting my job and going off around the world. And that was the beginning of this stage of my career. I went around the world to write my first book, Eat My Globe, and ended up, meeting my wife and moving here to Los Angeles, which I never expected. That was my second marriage. It is my second marriage. I expected, never expected that. Never expected to move to Los Angeles from London, which I still consider home, even though I've been here now 11 years nearly, and so ended up here. And so I never make, what's that phrase they say, if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
Right.
And so so I never make any kind of big decisions like that, because I don't think they've ever happened in my life.
I think it's a fantastic lesson for all of us to bear in mind, especially as we come charging out of COVID. Like, there's so many things I was supposed to be doing, I should have been doing. I think we need to sort of ease slowly into it. Are you
Definitely.
looking forward to escape? Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that I've noticed as I've kind of been emerging from, the pandemic, as people are, it is kind of, I think it's like Plato kind of stepping out into the light, as it were. But there are elements of it. I feel very guilty of not having achieved as much as I thought I should, particularly as I'm an older person now, I'm in my 50s. And I there's only limited time I have left. And last year I wanted to go to Bhutan, and I wanted to walk parts of the Spice Trail, and I'd marked down to walk the Compostela Trail down to, in Spain, and all of these things. And of course, all of that was put on hold. So there was an element of guilt about not having achieved stuff. And then there's just uncertainty. We went out for a meal at the weekend, for one of our first meals outside in forever. And I found that I'm struggling to eat food outside because it's different from the food I cook at home, which tends to be a little less rich. It tends to be a little less, kind of full on, even though this was a simple brunch. And I realized that it is going to be very kind of soft shoe time as we go out into the kind of big bright lights again and try and remember what normality is.
I found myself, I'm now fully vaccinated, right? And my immune system is at full capacity, or, whatever we're supposed to say. And I was out walking the dog last night with my husband past a beautiful outdoor Italian restaurant near my home, right next to the bookstore, actually. So we actually have a bookstore and a restaurant next to each other, which is sort of dreamy.
Perfect.
Right. And I thought, would this be my first venture out, my first real what is going to be my first experience, and what's it going to be like? And I'm also like very nervous about germs and stuff like that, but I just wondered what it's going to be like. How do you choose, right? It's sort of breaking the spell too.
I think it is. I'm walking around outside a lot more. LA this morning, we're actually doing very well right now. We're below 1% in terms of kind of the testing and everything. So they're beginning to relax things. So the mask mandate has just been relaxed now in LA. If you're fully vaccinated, which I am too. but I think certain things. So for me, travel is right at the heart of what I do. I travel. I've approaching 100 countries now, and I've got lots more to go to. And so I think two things. One, traveling around the United States, which will be our first step, and we're already planning a road trip. We have a demo dinner to do sometime in August, and we're going to drive, and that's in Indiana, I think. And we're going to drive from LA to Indiana and go to some of the states that my wife hasn't been to. And I've been lucky enough over the years to go to every state. And this is an extraordinary country to visit anyway. It really is that kind of 50 countries in one. And I think sometimes we don't appreciate that as much. And so maybe this is a kind of God-given opportunity for me to appreciate that, go with my wife and go to everything from, the Devil's Tower in Wyoming to Little Bighorn or wherever. We're going to go on this long drive from here to there and back. And then after that, I won't feel truly back until we're abroad. And as I said, we're planning now Bhutan, which is one that's been on our list for a long time. And so once I'm standing there in kind of another country where we feel allowed to be there again, which obviously we haven't been. I haven't been able to go back to the UK for a year or so because they wouldn't allow me in, or the amount of time I'd have to be there. I'd been quarantined the whole time, so there wouldn't have been any point. So once I'm doing that, then, or we're in, my wife's Filipino American, so once we're in the Philippines or once we're in wherever we want to travel, Kazakhstan is on our list and all kinds of other places. Once we're there, then I'll feel back.
Do you have any rules for, I have questions about Kazakhstan, but I also want to go straight into, do you have rules for road trips? Like things you like, do you allow yourself to like know where you're going to have lunch? I mean, lots of people either, or do you just sniff it out?
It's what I love. I mean, the many, many things I love about being married, and we're coming up to a big anniversary soon, but is that my wife is an organizer. So she's the spreadsheet person. She's already planning our trip for August with spreadsheets and road maps and restaurants. And then I'm the one who goes, let's just go down here and see what happens. So, and she's very open to that too. So we have suggestions from her, and we have some places that we really all want to go to, some great restaurants. And, I'm sure we can talk about it, but I think some of the best food in this country right now is happening outside of the biggest cities. And, which is wonderful and really remarkable and happening for all kinds of reasons. So we're going to go and make sure we visit some of those. And then other times we'll just go, oh, I've heard about this place. Let's stop off at so-and-so, Wyoming, and see if it's any good. So I think that's the best way to kind of have a roadmap, but allow yourself some freedom as well.
I find that one of the challenges, I've been doing a lot of driving up and down the East Coast. And one of the challenges, if you're not prepared, is finding a place that isn't a chain restaurant.
Yeah, the chain restaurants obviously are multiplying, and particularly we're going to see that, I think, after the pandemic, because a lot of the mom and pop or the smaller places, independents, have struggled just because of having to pay their rents. And I think, I'm quite sanguine about this. There are two sides to it. I actually do some work with an organization that works with the R&D chefs from a lot of the chain, the big multiples. And one of the things that you find out when you meet these folks, these men and women there, they come from really great culinary backgrounds, and they're really kind of determined to do the best they can. And so I think sometimes we can be very critical of chain restaurants without trying to understand what function they serve, which is primarily about consistency. And some of them are really good. I mean, don't get me started on my addiction to Bojangles biscuits, because
Bojangles biscuits are so good.
I know. So, sometimes I've been baking some biscuits this morning, and I'll tell you what, these particular biscuits are pretty good, and I'm a very poor baker, so I feel like I'm here under false pretenses chatting to you, because I know you're a serious baker and I am not. But some of the chain ones, I go, yeah, they're nice, but they ain't no Bojangles.
And the other thing is especially as I tend to go, I travel a lot because my daughter does horse shows, and not the ritzy titsy kind of horse shows. We just go into rural areas. Yeah. And for a lot of the places that we go to, to be able to go out to a chain. So for all my about chain restaurants, to be able to go out to a chain restaurant, spend X amount of dollars and get substantial value for that is, you know, a wonderful thing for people out there, right? You know, it's a very good value and quantity for people who might not always have the chance to go out.
Yeah, and also I always think when I was writing my last book, which was called Fed White and Blue, which was about me becoming an American citizen, I kind of set out, you know, to find out about America, and I had a great time for a year just traveling around the country, and often I would stay at, you know, kind of chain motels or chain hotels, you know, that we all know when we drive around the country. And often the only place nearby would be like a Texas Roadhouse or one of these places.
Yeah.
So that's where I would end up going and sitting at the bar and having a beer. And some of the best conversations I've had with anybody has been sitting there, and people might have recognized me or not, but we just have these long conversations. And what I found is obviously people have different politics. They have, you know, lots of different things. And I end up just having a decent conversation with them. So, you know, I have a kind of fondness for chains that I shouldn't probably have as a food critic for the Food Network. But I think most of them try and do a good job.
Yeah. And it's how a lot of America eats. So there's no real reason to be a snob about it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm not at all.
Speaking of snobbery, I having made these almond biscuits, because the true purpose of, I mean, the reason I have people on here is to invite you into my kitchen and to cook with me. And you were kind enough to provide a recipe for extraordinarily tender biscuits, as we say, and a biscuit in the sense of an American drop biscuit.
Yeah.
But they're unusual because they're made with almond flour. Where did you come up with this? How did you come up with this?
Well, I mean, there are some people who have done some gluten-free biscuits that have got, you know, almond flour in them. And so, you know, I'm not claiming that I'm, you know, totally the inventor of this, but I've altered them a lot. And I basically, because I had almond flour here, because I make a lot of Indian food, and one of the Indian dishes I make a lot is chicken korma. And my chicken korma recipe, even though I say so myself, is very, very good. Again, I say that it not being, you know, kind of completely mine, because this is, you know, they've been making kormas in India for years. But I use almond flour. So it uses almond flour, cream, you know, some spices, and then the chicken, obviously. And so I had a lot of almond flour, because I think at the beginning of the pandemic, we went into kind of mass buying of almond flour probably. So I was just looking for other things to do with them. So I came up with these biscuits, and I've done them with the recipes on my website, but you can have them sweet, you can have them savory. I've made them with herbs in them. You know, the ones I've got here have got cheese in them. And today I'm probably going to make a kind of a sandwich out of them, like a breakfast sandwich style, with some bulgogi beef that I have. So it'll be a little bit of an oddity.
Yum.
But I have to say, of everything I've ever posted a recipe of, these are the ones that have had the most reaction.
I've made one version last night, absolutely plain, just to see what they were like. And I work a lot with almond flour, and because I love the texture that it adds. I also, because we tend to eat more sweets than most people probably have in their house, I've always looked to sort of like, let's up the ante here, and like, let's get a little protein and fiber in our food. Not that by any means I live some sort of wholesome life, as anyone who knows me, but I try my best, right? So I've added almond flour to chocolate chip cookies, and it's magnificent. Or to make shortbread with almond flour. Because they have no gluten in them, you don't run the risk of having a tough biscuit.
Well, yeah, what I do love is they're very crumbly, and particularly as when you have them, you know, as I think is true with all biscuits, when you have them hot out of the oven, and you even don't allow them to cool a little bit, so they're still a little bit more crumbly than they should be, and you start putting butter on them. Or my favorite, this is an odd one, but people get cross at me when I talk about this because it's my favorite sandwich, is a peanut butter and jelly with blue cheese in it, which is, so peanut butter, jelly.
I'm gonna be open-minded about it. I will definitely try it, because I have blue cheese right here. I have peanut butter, but what kind of jelly?
Well, I think it depends. It depends on one's mood, but I'm a great fan of like chunky strawberry jam, kind of with a bit of chunks in it. Or if you're very lucky and you're close to a store that you can get it, Rose's lime marmalade, peanut butter,
Oh,
and blue cheese in one of these biscuits is one of the kind of eye-opening things that will ever happen in your life. Try it, and you can tell me. But seriously, it but I remember being
how?
on the Next Iron Chef, and one of
Mhm.
the we were in Las Vegas, and I'm trying to remember who it was, but they each of the chefs that was left, it was 6 chefs or whatever at this point, was given odd ingredients, and one of them was given peanut butter, fruit, and blue cheese. And I said to them they should make this sandwich. And I said to them, and I got so many odd emails from people going, "How
Yeah.
that's ridiculous!" And then lots of people tried it, and it is so good. It's so good, particularly if the biscuits are warm, and the blue cheese begins to melt just a little bit into the peanut butter because it just works. Give it a try.
I can't wait to try it. I really love blue cheese. I also think that the peanut butter and jelly sandwich is one of the perfect concoctions.
Oh, particularly if you have the crunch, you've got to toast it though. You've got to have. I don't want soft.
Toasted.
Got to
Mm-mm.
have some. It's got to be toast. Otherwise, it's not a sandwich. It's just mush.
And
And
the
it's got to
peanut butter has to start that melty thing. It has to start kind of rafting its way off the bread.
You're definitely a person after my own heart attack. The and it has to be crunchy peanut butter as well. Smooth peanut butter is an offense against humanity.
Okay, we'll take that one offline about the crunchy versus smooth. I respect your opinion a lot. So, but I think maybe if I'm going peanut butter and blue cheese, that the crunchy might be very important there. Otherwise, I think it'd be too much mush in one place.
I think so, and I never really liked those sandwiches as a child that were just mush. And in fact, when I always say that when I judge, one of the things I notice with chefs, even very experienced chefs, they're very good at flavor and often very bad at texture. And everyone's after things that are kind of soft, and it seems to be kind of I think an American thing about everything being tender and everything being soft. And you find in the rest of the world it's quite different. America's the country where they think you cut a steak with a spoon or a butter knife.
Right.
And where you go to some countries where they will actually eat the beef, and what they'll do is they'll actually chew the beef and then raise a napkin to their mouth and discard the meat once it's given all its flavor. And I always joke that coming from Britain, I always say, well, I have the British teeth, but Americans have had so much work done on their teeth, they need everything to be soft. And so I think texture is the most, to me, if you're making anything, texture is as important as flavor. And it's something we don't play around with as much here in American cuisine, well, whatever you would call American cuisine, as maybe some cultures do. If you're in China, they play around a lot with really soft cuisines and then a lot of fried and then a mixture and putting those together in a really kind of exquisite way. The Philippines does that really well. Indian culture does that very well. A lot of cultures do it very well. And I think we don't explore it enough here as much as I'd like.
And I think that's one of the things, we as, if you want to talk about like a group of people like Americans, is we're like experiencing cuisines from the rest of the world.
Of course.
Flavors we kind of get used to, but some of the textures are a little bit like, have you ever had like the soft, like mochi, the pounded rice candies, that are the first time I tried one, I was like, I'm not really sure I can do this, right? Because it had a real chew to it and the flavor was really like reminiscent of something and it was really pleasing, but the texture was really something I had to get over. Now I love them.
I think a lot of it is just, it's not because people aren't, don't have educated enough palates. Of course there are here, across the board, everyone, but I think a lot of it is experience, or a lot of it is also, people being intimidated by trying things. I'm a huge fan of sea urchin, and that's a very challenging texture if you're, not into seafood slime, because it is very unusual on the palate.
Yeah, and usually words like slime don't usually like sell. Like, I teach a lot of food writing, and words like slime and glop and other things that really perfectly evoke a dish don't really sell it.
I'm going off on all kinds of tangents here, which you'll have to forgive me because this is what I do. And I think
Me too.
a lot of it is prompted by I had a very lucid dream that was actually about baking. So I was obviously nervous about being on here. I was dreaming about, I was in a war, a confrontation, a violent battle in Southeast Asia, where I was leading a unit that was promoting Hong Kong style egg tarts against a unit that was promoting Portuguese Macau style egg tarts. And it was very violent. And I was like the leader of this unit. So I've obviously got this whole notion of food and baking in my head right now. So if none of this makes any sense to all the many people who I know listen to this, including me every week, I apologize.
But I maybe there's somebody in this group of people who listen that will have some sort of animating, have some sort of animation skills, because wouldn't that be a wonderful sort of anime of like the battle with the people with the egg tarts leading battling each other for what? The consistency? Like, what are the main differences between a Hong Kong style egg tart and a Filipino egg tart? Well, were the Portuguese there with their egg tarts?
Well, the Macau one was Portuguese.
Portuguese, right?
They were a colony until 1990, or dependency or whatever. However, they would have described it until 1999, and then of course, so theirs is very much like the Portuguese egg tart. What do you call it? Natas. My mind has gone as the exact words. My Portuguese is very poor. But the Hong Kong ones are more British style. So the pastry is more like a short crust pastry, the pastry that built the empire, and the egg custard is.
And my upper thighs, yeah.
Yeah, yes, and the custard inside is more firm. Rather than the slightly kind of giving one of the Portuguese that gets charred on top. And trust me, in real life, both are wonderful. But last night in my dreams, heaven forfend that one should ever eat a Portuguese tart. That was never going to happen. It was very weird, and it was very lucid and very kind of detailed, which I was, as I said, I was obviously worried about talking to someone who bakes seriously, but I don't, because I couldn't make either very well.
I don't think I've ever impacted somebody's dreams that way. So that's very, I don't know. I kind of like it. We are talking here about like texture and scones and things. And one of the things I was thinking about before this show was, as I looked at your recipe, was, what is the difference between, and I went down the road of what's the difference between a scone and a biscuit. And by biscuit, I mean Southern biscuit. I don't mean digestive biscuit. And then there's American style scones, and then there's British style scones. And maybe it's the new happy, it's springtime, and I really want to maybe it's Joe Biden in office. I just want to have a much more positive, inclusive view of the world, and decided that I'm going to stop talking about the differences between food and instead talk about the similarities, because I think that's where food history really is important for people to understand.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And it's one of the reasons why I'm completely fascinated with food history, because so many of the things that we think about as being kind of very modern and very us, and you go back and you look at the history of them, and the arguments over baking and the arguments over cooking, but way back when, going back to medieval times, or even going back to almost pre-written history, you see kind of daubs on walls of people selling wine and all kinds of things. So that very little has changed, and particularly, I mean, scones and even the way I say it there. So I say scone, and
I say scone.
And scone in England is a regional thing in terms of how you pronounce it, but also a class thing. Mm-hmm. So if you say scone, pardon me, if you say scone, that was considered more upper class. Scone was more working class, and but primarily as well regional, which again, if you lived in the north, even though I came from the north, that was considered more working class than being in the south. So in the south, they're all and everything in Britain comes down to class, whether you put your milk in your tea first or your milk in your tea last. Everything comes down to reasons. So first of all, even the pronunciation of it is interesting. But but also it tells you the history. So, there are recipes of scones or something equivalent to them being made by the Pilgrims. So, when they came over in the 1600s and to what became the United States, and the way that they made them was using local ingredients. So instead of necessarily using cream and butter and things that were harder to get, they might use lard, or they might use, and so they began to alter. And then particularly as you move down south, they began to alter again, and then they became the biscuit. And they would get, they're not truly a biscuit in the definitive sense of the word, being twice cooked, as
That's
the
right.
name obviously suggests. But it is really interesting, because if you do say to a British person biscuit, they will think of a digestive biscuit or a chocolate covered hobnob, which is the greatest biscuit in the history of the world for dipping in tea. And but digestives, I make a mean digestive biscuit. That's one of the other few baking skills I have. And they're wonderful to have, because I found out that I'm British, so by law I believe anyway that if you have a cup of tea and you don't have a biscuit to dunk in it, you kind of lose your British passport. And so
it's true.
Yeah, and I'm sure you have a British husband. I'm sure he is a master of dunkology, because certain biscuits stand up to it and certain ones don't. And a digestive is the non plus ultra of the dunkage biscuit, because it holds up to it. And if it
does hold up to, but the chocolate layer if you have a digestive with a chocolate layer, which is all important to me,
yes,
then that helps. I think it aids in the dunking. It
aids
in structural integrity.
Well, it definitely aids in the dunking. It holds it all together. But also what happens is there is this slight kind of, I don't know if the word is osmotic process between the chocolate going into the tea and the tea soaking into the biscuit, and they become one. So it's a very philosophical thing. The dunking of the biscuit isn't just, kind of just because of the food. There is something about this, and it's also about the timing of it. I always say to people, I get asked about, making tea. Tea is, my passion. I can't drink coffee. So I drink tea, a lot of tea, because I'm British, and I have my own tea that I mule over from the United Kingdom, which is
I do too.
Taylor's Yorkshire Gold, which is wonderful stuff. And I try to explain to people in the US that it's not just about the tea itself. It's the process of, in England, you could lose a leg and you go into someone, they go, well, sit there and I'll put the kettle on and we'll talk about it, And that period of 10 minutes while the kettle is boiling away is how all problems are solved, because while there's nothing to do while the kettle's boiling, as they say, a watch pot never boils. So you go and talk, and in England, putting the kettle on is the answer to everything. And I try and explain that to people here. And one of the reasons that I was absolutely certain that I was going to, wanted to be with my wife for the rest of my life was our very first kind of, not a Valentine's Day together. She bought me an electric kettle to have here in the United States. And I said, this woman gets me and I'm going to be with her forever. And I was very happy.
And an electric kettle makes all the difference, first of all.
These things that
of all the things in the kitchen. And I used to write about kitchen gadgets for Newsweek. And I would, be very particular about what gets allowed onto my counters. First thing, possibly if I only had to choose one, it would be my electric kettle.
Always. And I actually have a little one that's about the size of a thermos that I take with me to every hotel so I can boil water properly. And the first thing I do when I get there is I go to the restaurant of the hotel and I get some fresh milk and put it in my fridge so I don't have to drink horrible UHT. And I take my own tea bags and a cup, my own rather sizable mug that I have here. And
that's a lovely one.
Well, because it's the right, it's the right size. It's got to be, slightly smaller than an Olympic swimming pool in the morning to keep me going.
And also, I think what people can't see, because this is actually only listened to, it's a very tall, thin mug that you have there, and I think the thermal properties must be very good if you tend to drink your tea slowly.
It holds its heat very well, I have to say. And I drink far too many of them. My doctors always complain that it's going to give me acid reflux or something because I drink so many cups of tea. But it's just like, there are certain things that I can't let go of, unfortunately.
The great example I have from like my life in Britain, I went to university in Britain, and my husband, he's British, was asking my mother-in-law, who grew up in Coventry during the war, which as people don't know was bombed heavily. And they went out, there was a air raid. They went out into the shelter in the backyard, the house next door. The bomb hit that house. Nothing much happened to them, except their neighbors did not fare so well. The hut flipped over. They were exposed. When the all clear came, and she explained this, told me the story very, in that very British way of like, oh yes, and then they died, and then this happened, and I said, well, what did you do? Like, what was the first thing that you did? She's like, oh, we had a cup of tea. As if, like, why would you even think you would ask a question like that? Of course, your neighbors blow up in a bomb. What are you going to do next?
You have
a cup of tea.
Well, it is British penicillin. It will cure all things. And, Coventry particularly, I mean, they suffered a great deal, particularly as they kind of, Churchill had to let it be bombed because of the history, because of the Enigma machines and all of this. So, he knew that they were going to bomb Coventry, but if he did something about it, the Germans would know that he was able to read the Enigma codes. And he always considered that was, he had to make the decision to let the bombing happen. And Coventry I lived very near there and lived in Birmingham for a while in my youth as a sales rep for Penguin Books. And,
wow.
You would go and visit Coventry and go to the cathedral that was rebuilt and all of those things. And you see it was a city of enormous resilience, in fact, but a city that had suffered greatly during the Second World War and remembered it very proudly. So I always remember Coventry. I still think of it a lot.
I describe it as the Detroit of England in its way. Mostly, I mean, for good reasons, like it had car manufacturer, and also a little depressed. I think of Coventry, and if I had to pick a color, I'd pick gray. Well,
I think part of that is the same connection I would have with somewhere like that. So I was brought up just outside in Sheffield. That's before I came down to London. And Sheffield is basically the equivalent of Pittsburgh. It's a steel and mine town. And, a steel and mine town that Margaret Thatcher killed, basically. And, I remember being there in the days of the miners' strike and all of those, and people going, almost going from total employment to total unemployment in a matter of months. And so Sheffield and Rotherham, where I came from, I think about those, as well. They were slightly grey, but like really kind of hardcore, blue collar. Actually, the people, even now when I'm driving around the United States, just the people I like the best. Nothing phases them. They're the people I kind of just getting on with their lives. And I find that's one of the things I love about traveling around the United States. I'm a very progressive person. I come from a very progressive family. Even my family in the United States, in India, rather, my father's family were part of the, Indian Communist Party. I mean, it's all, going back to it was Communist Party was huge in Calcutta. It was the intelligentsia. And bear in mind, it was a very Indian style of 1950s communism. So, they still owned lots of property and still owned it. It was a very interesting style. But yeah, it's not like, it's really fascinating. Rabindranath Tagore and all of these people there.
Of course.
But I find, when I drive around the United States, just those are the people like I said, sitting in a bar in a Texas Roadhouse. It's just like the most fun I can ever have, actually, sometimes.
What was food like for you growing up? I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, mine was very unusual because it was half Indian and particularly a particular style of Indian, Bengali food. So my father was from Calcutta. And my mother, who was actually Welsh, learned to make Bengali food exceptionally well. In fact, her in-laws are, my relatives in India used to say that she was a kind of reincarnated Bengali because that's the only way they could understand this young Welsh woman learning to cook Bengali food so well. But then I also had the traditional Welsh food. My Welsh grandparents, who were bakers, my grandmother was a baker. She would bake breads and cakes and pasties.
Bara
And sausage
brith.
rolls.
Would she make bara brith?
She would make bara brith, and there's another one called Tishan Lap, which is another cake.
Tishan Lap. Mm-hmm.
And they would make all of these cakes. So it's a real mixture from that point of view. I think British food, and I wrote a book, Eating for Britain, about going around trying to find some of the best food in Britain. And again, I think being British, we're slightly kind of apologetic about our food. But there is, right now, particularly, I think British food is really at a great point. So I would say we have better producers than there are in the United States in some areas. We have more artisanal cheeses being made in Britain than being made in France because of people like, I can't remember the name of them, the big cheese seller in London. My mind has gone blank.
Neal's Yard.
Neal's Yard. Of course. I've spent time with them going to cheese places. So we have amazing cheese. We have amazing produce, amazing husbandry of kind of game and stuff like that. So but I think a lot of it is based on post-Second World War. Yeah, we saw a little bit of it in the United States, but the government having to feed the country rather than feed the country well. So it's the times of block cheddar. It's the times of, processing. It's the times of convenience food. And again, that mixes with, the same things that happened here, women deciding to go to work after, the Second World War. And so there was this bad period. And certainly when I think back to the 70s as a kid, things were pretty grim. But right now, anyone who says that now about British food just doesn't know what's going on there, really. So I kind of ignore it.
I do too. I'm also a very big champion of the British supermarket. And I don't just think it's when I go into a British supermarket, because, when there's not something like COVID, we go every summer and see my husband's parents. And they live in the back of beyond. They live just on the Welsh border in Herefordshire in what's called the Golden Valley.
Yeah.
And their next door neighbor is a flock of sheep. And the other neighbor is a horse who occasionally looks over the fence. And that's about it. But within a few miles, I can go to a supermarket, and Herefordshire, for all it sounds beautiful and elegant, is not a very wealthy area. And the supermarket, though, reflects all the travels that British people have done. And so I can go into a supermarket in Herefordshire and get pieces of Iberico ham.
Oh, yeah.
And can make an entire obviously it's closer to Spain, but there's a need for it and a desire and enough turnover that in the middle of Herefordshire, I can make a complete and beautiful Spanish tapas.
And I think, obviously you've touched on probably my favorite country in the world there, Spain, and I'm a Spain obsessive. We used to have, until my father died, we had a little family home in the south of Spain near Malaga.
Oh.
And so I've been going down there forever, and my brother and myself, we wrote how I started doing a lot of writing about food was in one of the very early food blogs, and we called it Dos Hermanos because of our kind of obsession with Spain, although it was restaurant reviews, rather grumpy middle-aged men restaurant reviews, which got quite well noticed, which were fun. And but so I still think about Spain, and in fact, I've been lucky enough to I wrote an article, I think it was for The Guardian, about going to the farms where the Iberico pigs grow. And to me, I think is the single greatest item of food in the world, the Iberico pig. When you go there, the Dehesa of that area of Spain, the western area, Extremadura, when you get to there and you see the pigs, they're having to eat 7 kilograms of acorns a day or something, some number. It's being their, kind of their feces is being measured every day by someone. To make sure that they are, the way that they're slaughtered is so careful. I think it's the most regulated food in the world as well. And to me, a bite of that, when you have it in one of the great bars in Madrid or Barcelona or somewhere, particularly Madrid for me is my favorite, probably food city in the world. And when you eat some of that and the oil is dripping because the fat dissolves at room temperature, and they have those little umbrellas underneath to catch the fat, and one of the people will take the oil, the umbrella with the little melted fat, and pour it over some warm almonds and sprinkle a little bit of salt on the almonds. So you basically have ham fat covered Iberico ham fat covered almonds with a little bit of salt. Even now,
these are tears. Yeah,
I know,
exactly.
I'm beginning to quiver a little
it
bit.
may be
Sorry,
ham fat or it's tears. I don't know what's coming out of my eyes right now.
So I'm totally going off direction now, but I found out, I love finding out things that I didn't know. And I found out the other day that the reason they call someone an old ham in acting is in the 17 and 1800s, they would wear the very lead-based makeup, the lead that ended up killing people, like Queen Elizabeth would wear, but actors would wear it very thick. And the only thing that would get it off was like a handful of ham fat, and they would wipe their faces and then wash their faces. And so it kind of made with the lead and everything, it made all their faces look very cragged, and so they were very noticeable because of the way their faces had almost decayed and so they were known as the old hams because they used so much ham fat on their faces, and that's where it comes from. So I just found that out the other day, and I just thought that was the most wonderful thing, given that we were totally nothing. I warned you we'd go all over the place. But I just thought that was the most fantastic stuff, because I love things that we take for granted and you go, wow. And the history, when you go and do some history research, you're going, oh gosh, I didn't realize that's where that came from.
I just learned, and you may know this, but speaking of like random facts to entertain people, when you finally get to see people again in real life, I heard it through the grapevine. Do you know where that comes from?
No.
It comes from, there was a pub in Lower Manhattan that was frequented by people during the Revolutionary War, and they would share secrets about the war and what was going on. And that pub was called the Old Grapevine. And so you heard it through the grapevine. I always had some image in my head of like people peering through grapevines and sort of whispering to each other, but no, it's just a pub in Lower Manhattan in the Revolutionary War.
See, now these kind of things I talk about these a lot when they're relevant to food, with
I could spend all day doing it.
Yeah, the Wall of Wall Street, when I wrote about pork, was built by the Dutch to keep wild feral pigs from getting into the city. That's what the wall was built for, to stop feral pigs like damage, because they would get in and damage all the buildings. And so they built a wall, the Wall of Wall Street, to stop pigs getting in. And again, it's just when things that we think of, we take really for granted, and then you suddenly realize it's also
beautifully picturesque.
Yeah, it is. And you think of Manhattan, and you think of all of those, these stories that you hear. And I love sharing those. And that was kind of the prompting for doing Eat My Globe, the podcast, because I wanted to share these, and kind of, if I put them on record, if I did them as you're doing on recording, then hopefully people might listen to them. One of the joys of looking at the figures for the new seasons is that I go back and I notice that the past episodes have a regular listen, because they're not dated. People go back and listen to them a lot, and that's really great. Where people are, one of the biggest ones at the moment was one of our very first, was the history of fish and chips, and people are still listening to that, however many thousand a month, and you go, I love that. So I'm very pleased, and as you are doing this, I'm sure just to have something that you're putting down in kind of a lot, kind of to record for the future.
Yeah, and one of the things I actually want to expand on in this podcast, which everyone can be privy to this, and send me in your thoughts and ideas, everyone. One of the things I focused on I trained as a historian, and really all I've ever been obsessed with is food, and I trained then as a chef. And so I finally have, I started collecting cookbooks, mid 20th century or early 20th century to late 20th century cookbooks, as a view, not just because I wanted to get really terrific cake recipes, which is probably like the heyday of the American cake, was the mid 20th century. And not just because of Duncan Hines, but because of what it kind of insight it shows into not just the world of women, but what they saw as their role in the world and what
Yep.
outside influences. And I don't just mean, hey, we've got refrigeration. So that, I mean, we have the railroad. So that means we have coconuts that can go to Washington. And that means we can have coconut cookies.
Yep.
And you see that explosion in cookbooks. Coconut was suddenly popular. Oranges suddenly became popular. And then I love trying to decode the misconceptions. And I'm sure you must have a 1,000 that you come across because your shows are so well researched. But for me, some of our most popular foods came because they were like marketing devices. Like when refrigeration came about, all the refrigeration companies in the late 20s and early 30s published cookbooks.
Yeah.
And so wouldn't you want to have a refrigerated cookie? But we didn't need to make refrigerated cookies. Grandma before that did fine without it. But now we make refrigerated cookies thinking it's all American. And really it was like, please buy my refrigerator.
Well, I think
You know?
a lot of those things, particularly when you're talking about kind of women's role, because, particularly after the Second World War and, definitely the changes in how women wanted to work and convenience food and, all of those are, I mean, they're just really fascinating. And I remember visiting the Smithsonian when I was doing an event with them.
Yeah.
And I was in the Museum of American History, which is incredible. And they have their food museum there, which has Julia Child's kitchen in there. And I mean, it's, it's really magical. And they're terrific people who are so kind of focused on what they're doing. Wonderful people there. And seeing, and I was very fortunate that they, like a lot of museums, what you see on the museum floor is only about 5% of what they've got. And so I was lucky enough to go with one or two of the curators to some of the archives and opening things like the original Tupperware that was given to them by the family that created Tupperware and realizing the change that made on the way that food was kept. The refrigerator. And I started looking for, and I'm thinking of doing, and I haven't, I'm doing research now for season 7. And I've got some, I'm already doing the history of rum and things like that. But I'm trying to find some more unusual subjects. So this season I've got coming the history of military rations, for example, just because I thought that would be an interesting way of looking through the years how much the notion of rations changed or didn't change. And actually it changed relatively little. Technology changed, but the notions of rationing changed very little. But the one that I'm thinking of now is the history of leftovers. And actually it's such a relatively recent thing because we had so much food spoilage. So we may have had more preservation before, but we didn't have many leftovers. And so, really that's when you start getting refrigeration. And I'm looking to try and find the first leftover cookbook. And I'm going back probably not far enough. I've seen one from kind of the late 1940s. But I've got a feeling that we can go back to the icebox era rather. And so if anyone knows anything about leftover cookbooks, I think that would be really interesting. What
it would be interesting. I'm sorry, go on.
No, I'm just
so much to say.
Yeah, whether there wasn't, culturally as well, we produce and both at home far too much food. The notion of creating too much is a sign of it's an American sign, the whole notion of abundance, and you get from the times of immigration, Italian and Irish immigrants and people writing back to their homes going, we get to eat meat every day. And then people writing back going, this can't be true because it's American abundance. So the notion of having enough food to have leftovers strikes me as a very American concept, that you created so much food and then what you did with it the next day became a thing in itself. And I'm trying to look at it from that point of view. And I'm going to try and find someone to talk about it, maybe, an academic who can talk to me about that as well. So if you can think about that, I'd love to know if you know anyone. But I just think that's even something as simple as, what I call resurrection lunches, yesterday's meals brought back to life, has something to speak about culturally to who we are, and I say we, I'm an American citizen, are as Americans.
I might take a step farther. I might go farther back in time. The first thing that I would do, in fact, as soon as this podcast is over is go into my library and look at books from the early part of the 20th century that were books for homemakers, either to give to their staff or but that were about the basics of keeping a home, because a lot of these have recipes about what happens when you have leftovers from that joint of beef on Sunday. And I mean, that's where we often, I mean, that's also where we get things like the Cornish pasty and things like that, right? It's leftover bits and bobs. So that would be one place I would start to look. And the other place I would also look is there are these sources of, like, the University of Indiana has local cookbooks from the entire part of the century online. And I think a lot of these ladies put forward their best thing to do with leftover whatever it was. And especially in the land of the casserole, if you start going into the Midwest, when did the casserole suddenly have to become a thing?
Although as long as I don't have to eat, I have to say it's from, and I'll be banned from Minnesota, but they have that Minnesota hot dish that seems to be a
hot dish.
I did try it because it wasn't something that particularly beguiled me, I'll have to say. But if you look at bits and bobs is a great way of looking at it. You know, I mean, we've had a little bit of that because as people became, more wealthy and middle class, and I was reading, Mrs. Beeton the other day for some reason. I can't remember particularly why I was reading Mrs. Beeton. Kind of a much maligned character in many ways, but if you look at the breakfast descriptions, like 15-course breakfast for the middle class or wealthy home, and they would use a lot of the cold muttons and things from the night before, and that would be served on the breakfast table along with eggs and all kinds of other things. So I mean, there was always that abundance, but I think it's become, once you become enough to start writing recipes specifically for something, then that's, like, culturally, I think a great moment. So yeah, I haven't quite formulated how that episode will work, but I'd like to look at it.
Mention that you always have really, really delightful jokes at the beginning of many of your shows. And I really wanted to offer one to you that it really is one of my favorite jokes.
Oh, go on. Oh, yes, please.
Food jokes. And you'll have to forgive me if I missed the episode when you used this one, but let me ask you, I'm retreating to my 6-year-old self where I thought these kind of jokes were just hilarious. Why do French people only eat one egg?
I don't know. Why do French people only eat one egg?
Because one egg is enough.
That is definitely good enough or bad enough, if that's whichever way you want enough to be used at the beginning. It's so weird that you do something that hopefully I think people is accessible but serious, and yet the thing that people comment on the most is these bad jokes at the beginning. But maybe I keep threatening to do a whole episode where all it is these bad jokes, and if I do, that will definitely be in there, very high up the tree.
If you need a writer for the show, you come straight to me. I'll ask you just 2 more quick questions in the lightning round portion of this, which is 3 actually. Scone. Sorry, you're a scone person. I'm a scone person. And your scone, cream first or jam?
Oh, well, I mean, we've got that whole Devon Cornwall thing, and I've got on the wrong side of both of them over the years. So I think I'll say it's location dependent. So if I'm in
Rotherham style. What's Rotherham style?
I think the Rotherham style is it'd be chips first and then fish next. But to me, I think you have to have the cream first, and then you have to have the jam, because I think you need that, that little mixture. I think the jam goes splurges too far. So I think cream first, jam second.
Okay. I mean, I'll still eat with you if you invite me, but I just find it's very hard to get, unless the jam is of a certain consistency, to blob it on top of the cream is hard. And then you maybe don't get enough spread with the jam.
I think it's
just something to consider.
It's all down to practice. The practice of spreading the cream, I think, is an art that is lost to many.
Your ideal birthday dinner?
Fish and chips, really great Yorkshire fish and chips. It's got to come from the north. It's got to be haddock,
all right.
So not cod. It's got to have mushy peas, which are wonderful things, very misunderstood. But, and this is kind of my middle class orthopedic surgeon's son coming out. Got to be with a bottle of Krug. Fish and chips and champagne is one of the greatest like proper fish and chips, like real proper fish and chips with a glass of champagne is one of the truly great combinations in the world. Give it a try.
My husband would make you answer this question, which is is almost, to me, as like divisive as the Cornwall Devon cream jam question. Fish and chips, what goes on first, the salt or the vinegar, and why?
Oh, well, no, the salt goes on first because you've got to keep the batter crunchy. The vinegar goes on last because the thing is, and also here's the thing, when you get fish and chips in England and always buy them wrapped rather than on a tray because you get more chips. They always put in a few more extra chips at the end. And if you're in Yorkshire, they will always put in a scoopful of batter bits that they call scraps in England. So this was when I was a kid, you would always stand in the line in your queue. Of course, you even if you weren't getting fish and chips, you'd stand in the queue anyway because you were British. So you'd stand in line, and if you were a kid with your parents, they would come out from behind the counter with a little cone of batter bits just for the kids. They go, "Oh, do you want some scraps, love?" I've got my Yorkshire accent, my Rotherham accent, very South Yorkshire. I sound a bit like Sean Bean in my real life. They come out and they go, "You want some scraps while you're waiting, love?" And you'd sit there with your vinegar-soaked and salt-soaked batter scraps from the fryer that they took out to give to the kids. And if you got them, they'd say to the parents, which is the kids' portion, and they'd go, this one. They'd put in a handful of these scraps. And so the vinegar goes on last because the true joy of proper wrapped fish and chips from the store is as you're walking home, and of course you'd open them on the way home, you open it up and that vinegar waft that comes out is, to me, the smell of fish and chips. That vinegar on batter smell is what makes it really, really special. And I try and explain to people here, there are people who technically make fantastic fish and chips here in the United States. Of course they do, because we have, wonderful chefs. But there's something contextual about that Yorkshire or wherever you are, Scotland, wherever, fish and chips, and you open it up and you get that smell of vinegar, and maybe it's a Friday night after you've had too many pints or something, and you're on your way home. And just that smell, or coming home from a football match, my team that I still support, Rotherham United, which I call very poor team. I call them Rotherham United nil to save time. And that smell on a cold Saturday afternoon or a Friday night, and you're opening them, is something that I miss more than probably any other food memory. And I'm lucky enough to have eaten at the best restaurants in the world and had amazing chefs and had great experiences around the world. But that kind of Proustian thing of opening up that fish and chip packet, wrap, is something that I miss more than anything from my kind of childhood. And so if I could recreate that, and I've done it when I go back occasionally, I will have chance to do it. And it's never quite the same as I remember. But there is something ultimately very comforting about proper fish and chips. And so it would probably be as choice my last meal. And I have a recipe for making fish and chips as I make them. The key, an old Victorian thing, was to put a little bit of turmeric in the batter. Tiny bit of turmeric. Gives it a beautiful golden color. And this comes from the original East End of London, which was where the fish and chips, the first fish and chip shops first originated. And it was very close to the docks. And you'd have things like turmeric coming in from, the Middle Ages, in fact. And so, things that were spilled, a little bit of turmeric in your batter, actually, even in any savory, like a pastry, if you're making a suet crust for a steak kidney pudding or a pasty pastry, tiny bit of turmeric in there.
I've used it often when I make like cheese crackers. I could talk to you for a very long time, and I would like to show you the beautiful turmeric that I have in my cupboard from this company called Diaspora, which imports it directly from India. They had used local farms and local people, and it's wonderful. But I wanted to end just on that vision of the steaming packet of fish and chips opening, typically on a rainy day. That to me is like, it's the counterbalance between that moist rain smell, the dampness, and it's like a package of comfort, I thank you so much for all of this. Thank you to Mr. Simon Majumdar for being my guest this week and reigniting my work on the history of the American kitchen. If you don't already, please check out his brilliant podcast, Eat My Globe. And if you'd be so kind, like me, love me, and subscribe to me wherever you listen to podcasts and leave a nice review. I swear, it really actually impresses my kids.
We're leaving today and entering a world of Mickey Mouse waving, princess meeting and greeting, lightsaber clashing, the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror dropping, Banshee flying, Space Mountain launching, galaxy rewinding. What's the point with galaxy rewinding? Fireworks igniting. World of other worlds. For whatever you love. Infinite worlds await at the most magical place on Earth. Walt Disney World Resort.